that I saw on Facebook, and I can't make videos on my phone, so I'm just making it live. But I will post it. I don't know, sometimes it doesn't work, so I'm really hoping that technology is on my side. But this post came up from the UK yesterday at 1:10 a.m. my time. I'm just going to read it because I think it's really important, and especially with me being somebody who is kind of like on the cusp of, like, I don't know, before millennial. Like I was born in 1980, so somebody who's like kind of not quite in like the starseed, indigo children like eras, and I don't even know if I would really consider myself a millennial. I was born into a lot of stuff that has really opened my eyes. So that, like, basically this is about children. Okay, so this is posted from the Citizens Commission on Human Rights London, UK page, which I've never been to. I don't know how this came up on my feed on Facebook, but here it is. New study confirms child and youth suicide risk with antidepressants. And I'm going to try just to read this and not talk about anything and just allow it to, unfold. But afterwards, like, obviously I'm going to respond, and I'm going to do so with respect and without, getting completely wrapped up politically. I'm just going to express how I feel based on my own experience. Okay. I'm not from the UK, by the way, but my grandfather lived in the UK. He had 7 children. They were all girls. He had them here in Canada, across the whole country. My grandmother took him on, a crazy amount of jaunts and rendezvous and endeavors around the world. And then I think he just burnt out and moved back to the UK. So he was a journalist, he was a writer. There's like zero information available about him. He came to visit once and I never got to meet him because I was on the street, which is a whole other story. But in a nutshell, I guess I have UK roots. So, and I've been to London. Okay, let's get on this though. So, new study confirms child and youth suicide risk with antidepressants. And like right off the bat, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to post about this at 1:10 in the morning, and my hair was just about dry, so I went to bed. Okay. CCHR warns that 5.7 million 0 to 24-year-olds on antidepressants faced increased suicide risks, as new study confirms, by CCHR International. And the CCHR International is a nonprofit mental health industry watchdog that has helped enact 180 reforms. FYI. Okay, in a new study published in Neuropsychopharmacology, researchers have found selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRI, antidepressants increased the risk of suicide attempts threefold for those younger than 18 and up, to twofold for those aged 18 to 24. The drugs had no preventative effect at any age, even for those at high risk of suicide. 1. Psychiatrists and doctors are taking enormous risks in continuing to prescribe these drugs to children, teens, and young adults given long-term research findings. The IQVIA Total Patient Tracker database reports that in 2020, an estimated 5.7 million Americans aged 0 to 24 were prescribed antidepressants, of which 2.1 million were 17 or younger. More than 35,210 children were ages 5 or younger. The study was led by Tira Lagerberg at the Karolinska Institutet, a medical university in Stockholm, Sweden. It found a higher risk of suicidal behavior in individuals under 25 treated with SSRIs after a depression diagnosis compared to untreated counterparts. Quote, there is evidence from randomized controlled trials, RCTs, that antidepressant treatment increases risk of newly onset suicide attempts or ideation in children and adolescents. End of quote. Strike one, suicide. Despite having evidence of the suicide risk in 1991, it took a 13-year campaign by parent groups, doctors, attorneys, and CCHR to get the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in 2004 to add a black box suicide warning to antidepressants, initially for children and adolescents, and in 2007 expanded to include ages up to 24. One would have expected a decline in their prescribing. A 2016 study published in the BMJ Medical Journal warned doctors to, quote, avoid prescribing antidepressants to children and teenagers wherever possible because they are associated with a doubling in the risk of aggression and suicide, end of quote. However, profit, an estimated 28.6 billion in global antidepressant sales in 2020, is a strong incentive for prescribers to ignore the warnings, Jan Eastgate, president of CCHR International, says. Since the FDA warning, doctors and psychiatrists have continued to prescribe the powerful drugs to this age group. Indeed, the neuropsychopharmacology study showed SSRI antidepressants are the first-line pharmacological treatment for depression and other so-called mental disorders. Furthermore, quote, the prevalence of antidepressant use in children and adolescents increased from 13 to 16% in the USA and from 7 to 11% in the United Kingdom in 2005 to 2012, according to another study published in Frontiers Psychiatry in May 2022. End of quote. That meta-analysis of antidepressant studies also confirmed that antidepressant exposure significantly increased the risk of suicide and suicide attempts when compared with no antidepressant usage among children and adolescents. In April this year, a University of East London study reviewed media reports on nearly 8,000 coroner's inquests and found that antidepressants were linked to 2,718 cases of hanging, 933 overdose deaths, and 979 suicides. CCHR's National Australian Office obtained adverse event reports on psychiatric drugs from the Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA, equivalent to the FDA, that reported suicides in children aged between 10 and 19 linked to antidepressants. CCHR has recorded cases such as a 14-year-old Irish boy who shot and killed himself after 46 days on fluoxetine, Prozac. His grieving mother said, my son had no history of self-harm, depression, or suicidal thoughts. He just had anxiety until prescribed the drug. The psychiatrist prescribed the antidepressant to help the teen with his exams after seeing him for only 10 minutes, according to the mother. One parent leading the campaign to expose psychiatric drug suicide risks is Matthew Downing, whose 12-year-old daughter Candace tragically took her own life 4 days after starting on an antidepressant, also prescribed for exam anxiety. Mrs. Downing is one of the numerous mothers who speaks candidly about being misinformed about antidepressants and other psychotropic drugs, with similar tragic results for their children. The mothers are part of the CCHR's must-see documentary for parents, Dead Wrong: How Psychiatric Drugs Can Kill Your Child. The documentary host Celeste Dubing courageously speaks about her 18-year-old son Matthew, who parked his Ford pickup truck on an aging bridge, climbed the span's superstructure, and jumped, killing himself from the fall. Matthew had been a vibrant kid, happy and full of life, but after a rough patch in his senior year of high school left him feeling down, a psychologist suggested he would benefit from the antidepressant Lexapro, escitalopram. He became withdrawn and anxious, which Celeste said led to his suicide just 9 weeks after starting on the drug. Strike 2. Violence. Antidepressants can also have violent adverse effects for some. In 2017, renowned researcher Peter C. Ghost published findings in the BMJ of a review of 64,381 pages of clinical study reports, 70 trials, obtained from the European Medicines Agency. We showed for the first time that SSRIs in comparison with placebo increase aggression in children. In a paper entitled Antidepressants and Murder, Case Not Closed, he warned the adverse effects are not limited to children through young adults, stating that anxiety, agitation, hostility, aggressiveness, impulsivity, hypomania, and mania have been reported in adult and pediatric patients being treated with antidepressants. Further, he said, it can no longer be doubted that antidepressants are dangerous and can cause suicide and homicide at any age. More research from Sweden reveals that young adults between the ages of 15 and 24 who had filled prescriptions for antidepressants were more likely to be convicted of a homicide, assault, robbery, arson, kidnapping, sexual offense, or other violent crime when they were taking the medications than when they weren't. Using Freedom of Information laws, BBC Panorama in England found 28 cases where antidepressants were implicated in a murder and 32 where users complained of murderous thoughts. The reports were made to the UK Drugs Watchdog, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. Researchers also took the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System and found that 25 psychotropic drugs, which included 11 antidepressants, had violence-related effects such as homicide, physical assault, physical abuse, and homicidal ideation. CCHR's report, Psychiatric Drugs Create Violence and Suicide, reports 32 cases of violent killings since the FDA warning in 2004, committed by children and young adults ages 12 to 24. Not all public reports specify the name of the psychiatric drug, but of those that do, 14 reference antidepressants or drugs to treat depression. The youngest was age 12 and was taking fluoxetine when he shot and killed a teacher and wounded 2 classmates. Strike 3, addiction and withdrawal. It is now widely accepted that prolonged use of antidepressants can lead to withdrawal symptoms. A systematic review published in 2019 identified 14 studies that estimated that 27 to 86%, or a weighted average of 56%, of patients who stopped taking antidepressants experienced withdrawal effects. John Reed, PhD professor of clinical psychology at the University of East London, stated, "Withdrawal effects aren't rare, they aren't short-lived. Symptoms include headaches, vertigo, anxiety, depression, and mood swings, electric shock sensations in the head known as brain zaps, problem with movement, lethargy, appetite changes, nightmares, hallucinations, and even homicidal and suicidal ideation." Jan Eastgate says, "It is astounding and egregious that children and teens are still being prescribed antidepressants that could drive some to commit suicide and murder." Add to this, parents who want to stop antidepressant use in their children can be faced with debilitating withdrawal effects. Consumers should never suddenly stop taking a prescription psychotropic drug, but always seek medical assistance to wean off them safely. So I read this at 1:10 in the morning, and it's, I guess, like, my end, like, bottom line at this very moment is that the way that people are being guided to believe things and take in information is, yep, just a second. How is it possible that, everything is being studied correctly? I understand that there's all these different, documents that are made and studies, and, thousands of pages are being kept in places that are, safe, and that, we have all these regulations and whatnot, and things are, like, private, or, there's healthcare, and there's, like, whatever you want to call it, the system, right? I understand that there's people who take, precautions, and that there's, like, people that are educated and whatnot. How is neuropsychopharmacology a thing? Like, first of all, neuropsycho is basically like the nervous system of life, like psycho means life in Greek, and neuroscience is not supposed to be something that is like neuroplasticity is not supposed to be something that is so controlled that it's all in a bunch of paper documents, you know, like psychotherapy is hugely required. Like it is like massively important. Like so important that I don't even think that I could like explain that in this quick little video that I'm making. Like how a person is supposed to heal on just taking medication without psychotherapy is like something very important for people to talk about because like it's not going to happen. And I don't think that like anyone who takes medication can think clearly for themselves, first of all, while they're going through the chemical changes that are going on in their brain without having some sort of psychotherapy and having a bunch of information thrown at us every day, all the time, changing and like, you know, morphing into new facts and information and statistics and, you know, a lot of it very traumatizing is not helping. That's not helping whatsoever. And that's not therapeutic. That's just like a mess, you know? And I think pharmaceuticals are there for a reason. And I think that they're very powerful. And I think that in my lifetime, in my span of life since I was, you know, aware of myself at 4, I've watched it, you know. I didn't take medication until I was in my early 20s, but when I was in my early 20s, I was finding out that like 6-year-olds were taking antidepressants. And I was just like, how can a child at 6 years old like properly respond to these kind of drugs if they can't even properly respond to what their body's going through, you know? Anyways, that's, you know, the bottom line is that how we are communicating about this stuff is just not working. Facebook is not the answer to this. We don't read the newspapers anymore. Like, this kind of stuff is not, you know, coming at us in a way that's, you know, humanly effective, for lack of a better word. The news reports a bunch of stuff and it just comes at whatever order. You know, they get it all in there and there's deadlines, and I'm sure it's a stressful environment to work in. And then it's just like they anchor it the best they can. And it's not a communicative environment. And neither is the doctor's office. I don't know. You guys are the ones playing with them. They should be right down there. Anyways, I have to go. But where were they? What did you guys were doing your like Japanese? You cut mine, Crazy. Yeah, that's true. I did. How about I find them for you in 1 minute and 30 seconds? Okay. My mother, like in a nutshell, another nutshell. Sorry, I'm all about the nutshells today, but in another nutshell, my mother tried to get me on drugs when I was 4. On pharmaceutical drugs for ADHD, but because I was extremely shy and like very timid, and we lived up in the Northwest Territories above the Arctic Circle and it was dark all the time, I was like basically a stuffy by the time I got into the doctor's office, and I didn't move. And she struggled, and I was unmedicated for 40 years, and I coped. For 40 years, I coped with this, and I learned how to cope with it, and now I could live without medication at 40, but my life, you know, probably would have been different if I'd had medication. That's not to say that every parent that walks into a doctor's office that's having issues with their kid should just, like, allow their kid to go on medication, right? Like, I'm really glad that my mom wasn't able to get me on medication. I honestly don't think that she really wanted me to go on medication. I think that kids were put on medication when their parents weren't able to handle the kids. And that is a parenting issue. And that might sound controversial, but if you're not going to take the steps that are needed to be taken as a parent, and you're working with people that aren't even willing to take the steps to talk to you, you know, that is the key that's missing, is psychotherapy. And psychotherapy should come first before pharmacology, you know, and neuropsychopharmacology. I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't think that I've ever even heard of it over here in Canada. And if I talk to anybody out there who has heard of it. It's going to be like quite a long conversation because I'm going to have some questions to ask. But I've been through the system, like for myself, for my mom, for my kids, and it's kind of making me dizzy. And I feel like we need to share more about this because I think that there are a lot of people trying to get help at different ages, and no age is too young. Can I go where? Like on the couch, you need. Oh, I can go on the couch, yeah. And they have answers too, right? Like children have answers too. I ended up going into art class and my parents never realized it, but like I couldn't see very well. That was a huge issue and that was neurological. That wasn't behavior. I couldn't see the colors in the paintings we were painting, and I have a painting with like a red background and a swan and it looks like murder. Maybe I would have become more violent had I been on medication. Who knows? But anyways, no more nutshells for now. It's just that article, it really hit me right in the center, like right where all of the things that I've gone through are still sitting and still healing. Healing is really hard when you are on the wrong medications or when you are over medicated or when you just, don't know how to cope without them because you're addicted to them, because your brain is addicted to them. And I know what automatic withdrawals are like because I wasn't informed of what an epidural was when I had my first child. And I had 4 massive shots of morphine in my body after I had a baby that I didn't know about. So education, is huge. And we have people, getting paid millions of dollars after going to school, getting like $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 educations that aren't talking to us. Okay. And education, I get it. It's really classy and it's really important and it gives you status and it gives you rank and it gives you a high paying job and it's success and we want everyone to have that. I get that. But no, not everybody is going to have that. That's just how it is. Not everybody can afford it, and so the people who are struggling need more time. They need more time. They need more answers. And I can't emphasize that enough, that when I was in hospital rooms for my kid, who was like my only kid who was on medication at the time, I wouldn't shut up. And I sat there for hours, and I wouldn't let them go. And I made them talk to me and I asked questions until they were festering. And some of them handled it and some of them, wouldn't get back to me after that. And that's the choice, right? To do that in your job. And so I would just bug a nurse or call the line at, after hours or whatever. And, I don't know about my 2 youngest, but like so far, up into my oldest generation, like without getting too much into detail about things that are really like not for me to talk about, we are open to medication. We just, we've also all required counseling, psychotherapy. These things are usually not covered, and they should be. They should be covered, especially if we're going to be exposed to Facebook, reading articles about stuff like this without any screening, any trigger warning, just like here it is, you're 13, you have a Facebook account, guess what? You get to know everything that's going on. And yeah, somebody's at my door, so I have to go. But I love children and I love you guys so much, and I recommend looking into what's going on. Hey, my friend is here. Love you guys. I'll catch up with you soon. It's your friend.